How would do you have a law practice today?
I do.
How would you describe your law practice?
It's a general law practice. My daughter and I practice together right across the street in front of the courthouse.
Have you ever served on the Anderson County Council?
I have.
And when?
I believe my first service was something like 90 to 91 or 91 to 92, that era. I served one term.
And then what did you do after that term on the council?
I ran for the South Carolina State Senate.
Were you successful?
I was successful, and I served 3 terms. I served 12 years in the South Carolina Senate.
Did you have another opportunity at some later point to serve on the Anderson County Council?
Yes, I volunteered to leave the Senate, and then I ran for Council District 1.
And do you recall when that second period of service on the Anderson County Council occurred?
I'm trying to think, probably about 2004 to 2006, maybe.
You realize that part of this case deals with the administration of Joey Preston, is that?
I do.
Was Mr. Preston the county administrator when you served on council the second time you served?
Yes, he was.
And do you remember when you began your service, or do you remember when Mr. Preston left his service with the council, just to try to get you?
I believe he left in December of 2010, I think.
I can show you some documents in a minute.
Yes, right.
That might refresh your memory.
Okay.
When you started with Anderson County, after your service on the South Carolina Senate, was Joey Preston the county administrator?
Yes, he was.
And did you serve as the chair of county council when you started again with the Anderson County?
That's right. My first year I was elected chair of county council.
And how did your service on Anderson County Council come to an end?
I served that term, then I ran for re-election, and after I served for about 18 months. They're 2-year terms, and after I served about 18 months, I was requested to be a trustee at Orangeburg, South Carolina State. And I found out that there was a conflict there, and I could not serve both as a trustee of South Carolina State and as a county councilman. Didn't know that when I first started. But then at that point, I resigned, and Francis Crowder succeeded me.
Do you recall what year that was? You may not, but
I'm trying. I thought that would be sometime in 2010.
Let me show you. Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes, you may.
Let's find that. Mr. Waldrep, I'm going to hand you what's been pre-admitted as Plaintiff's Exhibit number 7. I'm showing you this, Mr. Waldrep, to see if I can refresh your recollection as to when did you serve on the Anderson County Council before you started with South Carolina State. Do you recognize that document?
I do.
What is that document?
That's a severance agreement and release of claims for Mr. Joey Preston in the county, and it's dated the 18th of November 2008.
Okay, now does that help you
It does.
bring to mind when you served after your service with the South Carolina Senate? Does this help you remember when you served on Anderson County?
Yes, it does.
What do you remember about what your dates of service were roughly?
Well, Mr. Preston was to leave. I continued to stay on until I still thought it was December, let's see, Mr. Preston stayed on until December the 31st, 2008.
And did you continue on after?
And so I thought it was maybe 2009, 2010, sometime when I stayed on, after Mr. Preston left.
Were you on the county council all of the year 2008?
Yes.
And Was it your understanding that, or let me ask it this way, was Mr. Preston serving the county as county administrator pursuant to an employment agreement in 2000?
Yes, he pursuant to some kind of employment agreement. When I went on council, I had never seen his employment agreement until sometime later when some issues arose about his employment.
Okay. May I approach again, Your Honor?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Waltrip, I'm now going to hand you what's marked as plaintiff's exhibit number 1, and it's been pre-admitted.
Right.
And Your Honor, I'm hoping it's okay with the court, but at times we will present these documents on the screen, if that's all right. Mr. Waltrip, plaintiff's exhibit number 1, can you identify what that is?
It's a master employment agreement dated 22nd of July, 1998 between the county and Mr. Joey R. Preston.
Is it your understanding that this is the employment contract that Mr. Preston was operating under in 2008?
Yes, sir.
If you would look at section 2A of that contract for us, and I'll present it on the screen
Right.
as well. Would you mind publishing to the court by reading that section 2A to us?
Right. It says term, section 2A. The administrator serves at the pleasure of council, and nothing in this agreement shall prevent, limit, or otherwise interfere with the right of the Anderson County Council to terminate the services of the administrator at any time, subject to the provisions set forth in section 3, paragraph A, B, and C of this agreement.
And now, Mr. Walter, if we look at section 3A of the agreement, which if you'll turn is on the next page. And I'm not going to ask you to read all this, Mr. Walter, because it's a little lengthier, but would you agree with me that that first provision is a provision concerning termination with cause?
Yes.
And if you look at section 3B, which is on that same page,
Okay.
is that a section of the contract that discusses termination of the county administrator without cause?
Yes, sir, it does.
So was it your understanding that the agreement that Mr. Preston was operating under provided for or allowed for the council to terminate him either with or without cause?
Yes, sir.
Do you have any understanding as to whether if the county council were to terminate Mr. Preston without cause in 2008, does it have to do anything with respect to Mr. Preston's contract if it made that choice?
Well, I'm saying that the council had the absolute choice to do it either way. But if it's without cause, then certain issues would come up about his severance.
And does the contract provide for a mechanism by which to calculate a severance payment to Mr. Preston?
It appears to provide a mechanism.
Mr. Walter, if you look at section 13 of the contract, which is on page 7 of the document in front of you, does the contract with Mr. Preston back in 2008 also have a provision concerning suspension of Mr. Preston?
Yes, it does.
And is this section 13 that's on the screen and on page 7 of Exhibit 1, is this the section that discusses how the county may go about suspending the administrator if it so chooses?
Yes, it does. If a majority of council votes to suspend the administrator, it has here for just cause, the administrator shall be given written notice and 10 days notice prior to a hearing and so forth.
So
Give him an opportunity to have a hearing if he desires one.
fair to say section 13 of the contract provides a process by which
That's
suspension
correct.
must occur.
Correct.
Do you know, Mr. Walter, just from your experience working for the state of South Carolina, do you know what state retirement service credit is?
Yes, sir.
What is it, generally speaking?
State retirement service credit is based upon the number of years and also the salary of the compensation that a person receives as a state employee.
And are you eligible for state retirement because of your service on the South Carolina Senate?
Yes, I am.
Are you aware or do you know whether or not a person who has state employment do they have an opportunity if they wish to purchase state retirement credits on their own behalf?
They can.
Is there any provision in the contract that you're looking at, exhibit number 1, the contract with Mr. Preston, that is there any provision in that contract that requires the county to purchase retirement service credit for Mr. Preston under any circumstances?
I'm not aware that the county would be required. I think the individual might have a right to, but not the county.
Now, Mr. Waldrep, if I may, I would like to talk to you about the year 2008, because we'll soon see, I suspect that it was an interesting year for the county of Anderson.
Yes.
Does Anderson County Council operate with staggered terms for its council members?
No, it's just everyone runs at the same time for 2-year terms, all 7 council people.
So would it be fair to say that the entire Anderson County Council will be elected every 2 years?
That's correct.
Was 2008 an election year for the Anderson County Council?
I believe it was.
And who was on the council at the beginning of 2008 by name?
We had Mr. Michael Thompson, we had Larry Greer, Ron Wilson, Gracie Floyd, myself, Cindy Wilson, and Larry Greer. Did I say Larry Greer?
Yes. Mr. McAbee?
And Bill McAbee.
And perhaps for ease of reference, if you don't mind, Mr. Waldrep, I'd like to call that group of individuals the 2008 council. Is that fair?
That's fine.
Did every one of the members of the 2008 council run for re-election in 2008?
I believe everybody ran for re-election, if I'm aware. Yeah.
And did that include you?
That's correct.
When were the primary elections held in 2008? Can you recall?
You know, it was always a little bit fuzzy sometimes, but I believe that they were in June of that year.
And what is the significance of the primary election in Anderson County, in your mind?
Well, everyone was a Republican, as I recall, except Ms. Floyd. She was a Democrat. But the, I guess you might say, nomination by the party was tantamount to election at the general election. So if you were elected in your primary, then there was no opposition. You know, usually there might be a petition candidate or something like that. But basically, that meant you were going to be elected and you would be seated sometime in January, you know, the following January.
And the general election is held in November of every year?
That's correct.
What do you recall about the various platforms of the candidates that were running in the year 2008 for county council?
Well, it was a hotly contested election, and there were a lot of candidates put a lot of work into it. And the way the county was being run, and Mr. Preston was a big issue in that campaign. And
what
I know,
sorry, go ahead.
from what I know, several candidates mentioned Mr. Preston in their campaign literature as being interested in changing county council way of doing things.
So it sounds like some people were running on a platform that included concern about how the county was run up to that point?
That's correct. And interestingly enough, before this election in 2008, the same issue had come up, I think, in 2006. Mr. Preston was also an issue in that race as well.
Do you know which candidates in 2006 raised concerns or issues in their campaign literature about Mr. Preston back in 06?
I know that the chairman did, Michael Thompson, in particular, had indicated, I think, that he was not favorable to Mr. Preston. And then there were some others, let's see, who else? I just know that a couple other candidates did, you know, but I don't think that I got too much involved in that. I may have had an opinion, but I was not, in the prior election, I was not focused on Mr. Preston.
And what about in 2008? What happened at the actual primaries in 2008 in terms of who won and who lost?
In 2008, Mr. Allen, who's chairman now, replaced Mr. McAbee. And when I go back to my memory serves me correctly, Mr. McAbee was one of those who appeared to question Mr. Preston, in his campaign literature kind of around that.
In 2006, you mean?
2006, but not 2008, because when Mr. Allen ran, I think people came to Mr. Allen, my understanding, and they wanted to know how the money was being spent in the county. So that was a change. Then Mr. Greer lost his seat to Mr. Moore, who had been questioning the county administrator and the way that the county was being run. And then Mr. Dunn replaced Mr. Thompson, who had done a 180-degree turn from 2006 to he became a very strong proponent of Mr. Preston, and so Mr. Dunn was elected to replace Mr. Thompson. So that created, again, the word sea change in politics.
So how would you describe the sea change as a result of the primary election results? How would you describe that sea change in terms of the level of support for Mr. Preston?
It was eroding quickly.
And would it be fair to say that the three you just mentioned who succeeded in the primaries, Tommy Dunn, Tom Allen, and Eddie Moore, appeared all to run on campaign platforms that were more questioning, perhaps, of Mr. Preston's administration?
That's my belief. That was my perception. Of course, I was running my own race, and didn't, I wasn't closely following their election, but that was my general impression.
And it sounds like 2008 wasn't the first time that candidates for county council ran on platforms that at least asked questions about the administrator's service. Is that correct?
Mr. Thompson, the previous, term, what he ran for was, I understand he was pretty adamant about being opposed to Mr. Preston.
Back in 06?
Yeah, 06.
Now, if you succeed for those candidates who succeeded in the primary in June of 2008, do they have any authority to act for the county or for the county council?
Not until they were sworn into office. That'd be January of 2009, I guess that would be.
And do those folks who succeeded in winning the primaries in June of 2008, do they have any authority beyond that of private citizens?
No.
In terms of what they can do for the county?
That's correct. As a matter of fact, that was cited by a chairman at one time during one of our meetings, but we all knew that their terms did not begin until in January, and their terms would not begin until they took the oath of office, which is required, and that would be in January the 9th, 2009. So they were just like anybody on the street, they had opinions, but they had no power.
And in June of 2008, having succeeded in winning the primary, these folks still had to survive the general election, although the way Anderson County is, that seemed pretty likely.
That's correct.
What about the 2008 council? And that's the one I described earlier, the sitting council in 2008. How would you describe its level of support for Mr. Preston in 2008?
Well, it was very strong.
And did you see any danger to Mr. Preston that the 2008 council would do anything to terminate his employment or otherwise breach his contract with the county?
The 2008 council would have been very supportive of Mr. Preston, and I can't imagine that they would have done anything to jeopardize his employment.
After the primary elections were held in June of 2008, did you meet with some of those folks who had won the primaries?
I did.
Would you tell the court about that? Like, who did you meet with? How often? You know, what were you talking about?
Okay. We had meetings, you know, in my office over a period of time. We had weekly meetings, and those people that attended would be me and Ms. Wilson. And the reason that we had, and the people there would be, Mr. Allen would come occasionally, Mr. Dunn would come, and Mr. Moore would come. And we had these meetings at my office on Witness Street for the purpose of looking at what financial information that we had, how the budget was being done, how the money was being spent, who was in charge, what kind of contracts were out there. This new council people most had not been ever elected before to any kind of office, and so what we were doing, we're going through kind of an orientation process. That was my intent, so that whenever these folks got into office in January, that they would hit the ground running, so to speak. That there would not be a gap there, a learning curve gap for this new council coming on. And so we would meet in my office on Sunday afternoon, usually for a couple of hours.
And as part of the orientation idea that you're talking about, is it true that newly, or I guess I should say it this way, folks who appear to be elected as council members incoming, say, so a primary winner in 2008 who's going to take office in 2009, are there ways in which those folks get orientation through the departments of council as well, or departments of the county as well, by meeting with county department heads, things like that?
I think they were interested in getting that information, you know. As to the extent of us being able to get that information was another